also do substantial purchase agreements of U.S. ag and energy.
Let's turn to the room, please. Let's start up front.
Good afternoon. Jamie Keaton, Associated Press. We had Li Changgang speaking to reporters shortly after the end of the talks today. He mentioned an extension of the pause. Can you give us some details on that, how long that's going to go on for, and how will it work? And if I could just throw in another one, what do you say to lawmakers in the United States and others who are concerned that concessions on export control on items like chips for AI will jeopardize U.S. national security interests?
Well, I'll take the national security question, and then Jameson could talk about the pause. We are very diligent in terms of the national security. Things go through the interagency at the White House, whether it's Treasury, it's NSC, it's Commerce, it's DOD, so that there's nothing that's being exchanged for anything. I think you might be referring to the NVIDIA H20s, which are well down their technology chip stack.
And I would say, I should also say the only export controls we talked about today were Chinese export controls on rare earths. Just U.S. export controls were not something we discussed. With respect to a potential pause, we're going to head back to Washington, D.C., and we're going to talk to the president about whether that's something that he wants to do. It's certainly something that's been under discussion, and so we'll brief the president on the outcome of this, and we'll see if there are any. We have further technical discussions that are happening right now as we speak among the teams, and so the president can make a final call on whether that's something that he wants to do.
Secretary Bessent, you just said again that the biggest problem in the relationship is China's overcapacity and that you want them to move towards a new consumption-based economy. What's your specific plan for addressing those economic imbalances besides purchases of U.S. goods? And then do you want me to go to Jameson now? Sorry, Ambassador. Okay. And then obviously the Section 232 investigations that the president is set to unveil in the coming weeks on pharmaceuticals and semiconductors would theoretically hit China after as well as everyone else in the world. After your talks today, will those tariffs be imposed on the Chinese, or did you make any commitments to pause them or not target the Chinese specifically with those actions? And then what would you say is the biggest concessions that the Chinese have had to make in these talks so far?
Well, I'll just repeat that China is the most imbalanced economy in modern times. And I think we are they're 30% of global manufacturing. They have a 2% current account surplus of global GDP, which we've never seen before, or probably not since the 1870s with the British Empire. And that's not sustainable. So the tariff levels will have quite a bit to do with that. And I think the other thing that we're seeing is that President Trump was very early on talking about the China problem. The U.S. experienced the China shock when China came into the WTO in the early 2000s, but Europe, a lot of the European business model, it was quite a business model, was predicated on cheap Russian energy, a depressed exchange rate because of the southern European countries dragging down the euro, and then selling goods into China. And now that China has jiu-jitsu'd the model, and under the cover of COVID, rather than increasing their consumer, they upped their export capacity, and they did it quite a bit up the value chain. So, we'll see over time, but my guess is that over time, the other economies, developed economies, will start increasing their tariff barriers, and the global South, they just can't absorb all this Chinese production.
I would say also, when you ask about what tools can be used to deal with this, this is part of the reason why the president implemented his tariff program. Right now, if you look at the numbers, we're still tracking an annual trade deficit with China. But if you If you extrapolate it out from the numbers we have so far it looks like it's going to be at least $50 billion smaller this year. So that's some progress already. With respect to the Section 232, this came up during discussions. The Chinese asked us about it. What's the plan? What's the timing? We shared what information we could. You've heard President Trump talk about this publicly, which includes, discussion of, having a situation where you start with a lower tariff, but then you go to a higher tariff at some point to try to, bring back manufacturing of pharmaceuticals or semiconductors. These are global actions. They don't target the Chinese. They don't target any particular country. They'll be applied globally. There aren't any exceptions or exemptions for particular countries.
And what's the biggest concession they've made?
That the Chinese have made? Well, I would say they blocked all of their rare earth magnets, and now we're getting them.
Thank you. Thank you both for being here. I'm just wondering if we can get some clarity on the tariff level that is threatened to happen on April 12th. I know the April 2nd tariffs were 34%. You add that to the fentanyl, 54%. That's where the tariffs are for many goods right now. So what is the overall threat to the Chinese in terms of a tariff level that could happen if there is no extension?
Well, I think you've seen, I've used the word boomerang, so if we boomerang back to the April 2nd level, they would go to 34. I notice, as the earlier question said, that the Chinese deputy minister did say that we had agreed on a pause. We have not. Nothing is agreed until we speak with President Trump. He's on Air Force One, I believe, doing a press conference right now, and we will be seeing him in the Oval tomorrow to go over the deal with him, and then he'll decide if the pause continues as is.
And just to be clear, Gavin, the president has discretion to change the rate depending on the circumstances that we have, et cetera. So while the snapback rate would be 34%, he of course has discretion under the law to modify that.
Yeah, my question is just the 34% is under the tariff level that's current for many goods. So would that be additive to what we have already? Would it be on top? Okay.
Yes.
So we're talking about the threat is that tariffs kind of in like the 80-85% level?
Yeah, depending on the product. Yeah.
Depending on the product.
Yeah,
okay.
but just kind of to tamp down that rhetoric. The meetings were very constructive. We're just that we haven't given the sign off.
Sorry, Melissa Eddy from the New York Times. Can you tell us, please, did you discuss a potential summit between the Chinese and U.S. President, the Chinese president and President Trump? And can you give us any timeline on what you're thinking about in terms of that?
No, the only thing we discussed was there was a recent phone call between the two leaders. On that call, President Xi invited President Trump to Beijing, but we didn't discuss that at all. What we discussed was implementing the desire of the two leaders for the trade team and the Treasury team to have trade negotiations with our Chinese counterparts. So our meetings were just to implement the will of the leaders, not to discuss if there would be a meeting.
Can you just give a time? When was that call? Do you have it on hand?
I think that was the June call, right?
Yeah, was it?
It's June 4th or 5th.
June 4th or 5th.
Thank you.
Great.
Hi, Clara from Jägerfeld, Channel 4 Sweden. You've also met with the Swedish government. What topics did you discuss?
We discussed a wide range of topics. First of all, we want to thank the government for the fantastic venue here. Very, very good to be in Stockholm in July. And we discussed the EU deal with the U.S., of which the Prime Minister, the Finance Minister were very supportive. The Finance Minister and I had met previously during World Bank and IMF Week in D.C. We discussed the importance of getting back to basics with the multilateral development banks. We discussed the Swedish economy and how things are going, how important trade is.
Yeah, we also talked about the huge success in U.S.-EU relations over the past few weeks with the recent NATO summit, where all parties agreed to increase defense spending, and Sweden is a big part of that. And so we talked about Sweden's defense establishment. And then, of course, we also talked about the EU deal and how important that was for both sides to reach that. We also talked about U.S.-Sweden trade. We talked about automobiles made in Sweden. We talked about stainless steel. We talked about ag products like onions and carrots. We learned all about about Swedish agricultural production, which is really interesting. So it was a very productive discussion, and we're grateful again for our Swedish hosts for helping us here.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, when I have spoken to experts regarding the EU-US deal, some have said that it feels secure that there is a deal, but that you still can be a little bit unsure if it would change. What do you have to say to that?
Oh no! Right now we have I have texts from some of my European counterparts about making sure the details are correct and fully put on paper. So we feel very confident about it, and it's truly a solid path forward for our two countries.
Thank you.
Yep, and I think the other thing that we discussed that's very interesting is the unintended consequence of President Putin's invasion of Ukraine is bringing in Finland and Sweden into NATO, and we discussed the historic reputation of the Swedish military and how good it was to have them in NATO.